The greatest good for the greatest number. Hello everyone, so, consider this. You have the last cookie. 2 of your friends want it. What do? Do you eat it yourself? Do you give it to one friend? Or do you break it in half so 2 people can be a little bit happy, instead of just one? If you started thinking about what would make the most people happy, you were thinking like a utilitarian. Utilitarianism is a big idea in philosophy, but it starts with a simple question. What action will create the most happiness and the least suffering for the largest number of people? It's a way of looking at our choices not just by what's good for us, but by what's good for everyone involved. At its heart, this theory is a form of consequentialism. That's a fancy word, but all it means is that we judge whether an action is right or wrong based on its consequences, its results. For utilitarians, the best results are those that maximize what they call utility. Utility is just another word for well-being, happiness, or pleasure. The guiding star for this whole philosophy is the greatest happiness principle. This principle says that the best moral choice is the one that produces the greatest amount of good, or happiness, for the greatest number of individuals. It's like a giant happiness scale, and we're always trying to tip it in favor of more joy and less pain for the whole team. Now, one of the coolest parts about this is how it treats everyone's happiness as equally important. Your happiness isn't more valuable than your neighbor's, and your neighbor's isn't more valuable than someone's on the other side of the planet. Pain is pain, and joy is joy, no matter who is feeling it. This was a revolutionary idea. It asks us to be impartial and to think beyond our own small circle of friends and family. We have to consider the well-being of all the people our actions might affect. This makes it a very powerful tool for thinking about big societal problems, not just personal ones like who gets the last cookie. So when a government is deciding whether to build a new park or a new highway, a utilitarian would ask, which project will bring more overall happiness to the community? They would try to calculate all the good things like kids having a place to play or families having picnics, and weigh them against the bad things like traffic noise or construction delays. The goal isn't to make just one person happy, or even a small group. The goal is to lift the total amount of happiness in the world, one thoughtful decision at a time. It's a very practical, results-oriented way to think about doing good. To really understand this big idea, we have to look at the thinkers who cooked it up. The first major player was an English philosopher named Jeremy Bentham. He lived a long time ago, back in the 1700s and 1800s, and he believed that nature had placed humanity under the control of 2 sovereign masters, pleasure and pain. Everything we do, he argued, is to either seek pleasure or avoid pain. For Bentham, the math was simple. If an action leads to more pleasure than pain, it's a good action. He even came up with a system he called the hedonistic calculus to measure it all, looking at things like how intense the pleasure is and how long it lasts. Bentham had a very straightforward view on pleasure. He famously said that, all things being equal, the pleasure you get from playing a simple children's game is just as good as the pleasure you get from reading poetry. To him, one type of happiness wasn't better than another, it was all about the quantity. More pleasure is simply more pleasure. He wanted to use this idea to reform laws in society. If a law or a tradition wasn't producing any real good, if it wasn't increasing overall happiness, then Bentham thought we should get rid of it. It was a radical idea that aimed to build a fairer, happier world based on real-world results. Then along came his student, John Stuart Mill, who thought the theory needed an upgrade. Mill agreed with the basic principle of maximizing happiness, but he disagreed with Bentham that all pleasures were created equal. Mill made a distinction between what he called higher and lower pleasures. Lower pleasures were the ones we share with animals, the simple physical sensations of eating or resting. Higher pleasures, he argued, were unique to humans, and involved our minds and spirits, like the joy of learning, creating art, or having a deep philosophical conversation. Mill famously wrote, "It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied." What he meant was that the quality of happiness matters, not just the quantity. He believed that anyone who had truly experienced both kinds of pleasures would always choose the higher, more intellectual ones. These higher pleasures, he thought, lead to a more fulfilling and ultimately happier life, even if they sometimes come with a bit of struggle. This refinement added a new layer to utilitarianism, asking us not just to seek pleasure, but to seek the best kind of pleasure. Section 3: Rules, Actions, and Tough Choices. The Utilitarian's Toolbox. As people started thinking more about utilitarianism, they realized it could be applied in a couple of different ways. This led to a split between two main camps: act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism. Act utilitarianism is the most direct approach. For every single choice you face, you should ask yourself, which specific action, right here and right now, will produce the most good for the most people? It's all about the immediate consequences of your individual act. If lying in a particular situation would create more happiness than telling the truth, an act utilitarian would say you should lie. It's a case-by-case analysis every single time. This leads to some tricky situations, which we can see in a famous thought experiment called the surgeon problem. Imagine a brilliant surgeon has 5 patients who are all about to die. Each one needs a different organ transplant to survive. Just then, a perfectly healthy person walks into the hospital for a routine checkup. The surgeon discovers this person is a perfect match for all 5 patients. An act utilitarian might be forced to conclude that the best action is to sacrifice the one healthy person to save the 5 dying patients. One person dies, but 5 people live. The net outcome is 4 lives saved, which seems to maximize the good. This is where many people feel a bit uncomfortable, and it's why rule utilitarianism was developed. A rule utilitarian takes a step back. Instead of looking at individual acts, they ask, what general rule, if followed by everyone, would produce the greatest good for the greatest number? They focus on the consequences of adopting a rule of conduct. In the surgeon case, a rule utilitarian would say that a rule like doctors should never kill a healthy patient to harvest their organs is a very good rule for society to have. If people couldn't trust their doctors, they'd stop going to hospitals, and public health would collapse, creating far more suffering in the long run. So, while a single act of sacrificing 1 for 5 might look good on paper, the rule that allows it would be catastrophic for society's trust and well-being. Rule utilitarianism, therefore, tries to balance the goal of maximizing happiness with the need for stable, trustworthy moral rules that we can all live by. It acknowledges that sometimes, sticking to a good rule, like don't steal or don't kill, is the best way to ensure the greatest good for everyone over time, even if it seems to lead to a less than perfect outcome in one specific isolated case. Section 4. Is it asking too much? Utilitarianism in our world today. For all its strengths, utilitarianism isn't without its critics. One of the biggest challenges is what philosophers call the demandingness problem. Think about it. If your moral duty is to always do the thing that creates the most good for the most people, that's an incredibly high standard to live by. It would mean that every time you spend money on something for yourself, like a movie ticket or a new shirt, you should ask if that money could have created more happiness somewhere else, like by donating it to a charity that could save a child's life. Following utilitarianism to its logical conclusion might require you to give away almost all your possessions and dedicate your life to helping others. This is a huge personal sacrifice, and for many people, it just seems like too much to ask. Morality, they argue, should be something that normal people can actually practice without giving up everything that makes their own lives meaningful and enjoyable. Utilitarianism seems to leave very little room for personal projects, hobbies, or even just relaxing. If there's a more useful way you could be spending your time, it risks turning life into a constant, exhausting calculation of how to maximize global happiness, which could ironically make the person trying to be a good utilitarian pretty miserable. It's a powerful criticism that questions whether this philosophy is a practical guide for human living. Another point of contention is the difficulty of predicting consequences. To make the right choice, a utilitarian needs to be able to see the future in a way. You have to predict all the short-term and long-term effects of your actions on everyone involved. That's an incredibly complex, if not impossible, task. What seems like a good idea now might have unforeseen negative consequences down the road. For example, a new technology that brings a lot of immediate joy might end up causing environmental damage or social problems that create far more suffering in the future. The theory depends on our ability to accurately weigh outcomes, but in the real world, our crystal ball is often very cloudy. Despite these challenges, the influence of utilitarian thinking is all around us. It forms the bedrock of many of our modern systems of law, public policy, and economics. When politicians debate a new healthcare bill, they often argue in utilitarian terms, talking about how many people it will help and how it will improve public health overall. When city planners decide where to put a new school or a fire station, they are trying to maximize the benefit for the community. The whole idea of a cost-benefit analysis, which is used everywhere in government and business, is essentially utilitarianism with numbers. It's a powerful and enduring framework for making decisions that affect large groups of people, pushing us to ask the simple, vital question, what use is it?